I'm Ernst Zundel with another Voice of Freedom program coming to you from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. We have been doing what I consider some mega project, a mega series on what happened before, during, and after the Second World War. And we have been looking at all kinds of books and documentation about what really is little known in the world, and that is the Holocaust of the Germans. Most people have heard of the Holocaust of the Jews because these people whine incessantly and have friends in high and low places, and they have dominated. Victimhood has basically been kind of preempted for them or copyrighted. Well, I'm a son of Germans, and after a book came out in the United States that was so utterly disgusting and blanketly kind of told the world that the Germans were out there holocausting every Jew in sight, I decided that something had to be done, that this was negative stereotyping of the worst kind. I'm referring to this massive tome here. It's called Hitler's Willing Executioners, Ordinary Germans and the Holocaust by Daniel Jonah Goldhagen. It was a British policy of continental balance of power always. But you see, was it British, or was it a policy of the oligarchy, of the banksters, as I call them, meaning the banking interests and gangsters, obviously, that have dominated British policies since Cromwell's time? And we know today from research done by David Irving, for instance, that when Chamberlain was removed and Churchill got to the helm, that Churchill's backers were people like Bernard Baruch, whom we have discussed in previous parts of this series, the advisor and banker to presidents, and in the Bernard Baruch, wealthy American Jewish financier who had been in charge of the War Production Board in America already before the war, had made horrific suggestions for crippling Germany at the Versailles kind of reparations called Peace Conference, and was right in there with Henry Morgenthau, your American Secretary of the Treasury, who concocted that deathly plan to virtually wipe out a great number of Germans. One estimate put it at 32 million Germans were too many. Then we came finally to this book by Theodor Nathan Kaufman, a Jewish intellectual and writer, who said in this book that the German nation should be exterminated through sterilization. Detailed plan reviewed by Time magazine. It's called it a sensational idea. The New York Times says a plan for permanent peace among civilized nations. And so finally I decided enough was enough, and I was going to put out this series of programs which you have seen, heard, or which you are about to hear and see. We talked about this disastrous balance of power politics that those oligarchy, those making up the bankers, the kind of aristocrats, the moneyed interests and so on in England and also in America were engaged in order to stop the Germans. I returned to this book, Gruesome Harvest, an American book published in 1947, and I'll quote from it because I don't want you to think that I, the German, am going to give you German sources. I want to give you Allied sources, American sources, British sources, so that you cannot claim to me that I'm the Nazi propagandist here giving succor to Adolf Hitler. I am a German. We are sick and tired of being kicked in the dust and having our heritage besmirched. This is my way of doing my part to getting it back, so that you, Americans, Canadians, Britishers, and so on, can face up to the policies that were maybe not done in your name, because you are too young, but certainly were done in your father's and grandfather's name. And if it's good and right and proper for the Allies to keep blaming the German generation, wartime generation, for all the ills of the world, I want you to look at your policies to see what share you had in it. We have already covered in the last program the disastrous British power policy of balance of power in Europe. And here is what this writer says. Although the German attack against Poland was considered a high moral international wrong, when Russia also attacked and Britain failed to oppose this aggression, which was also a brutal stab in the back, but continued the war against Germany alone, it became clear to many observers that something more was present in the situation than readily met the eye. There was a secret rider attached to the treaty, which has since been made public and which stipulates that the expression "a European power" employed in the agreement is to be understood as Germany. Hitler didn't know that apparently at the time, that Germany alone was to be attacked. And they were waiting for the British to attack the Soviet Union. Nothing happened. In other words, Britain was taking advantage of the situation to go to war against Germany because the German Reich had become too strong and had upset the European balance. To correct the fundamental trouble from Britain's point of view, Germany, after her defeat, must be weakened as a protective measure. No morality enters into the matter, only considerations of power politics and British survival. Lord Lothian, then British ambassador to the United States, said in March of 1938, at the time of the Austrian crisis, he said the following: "If another war comes, and the history of it is ever written, the dispassionate historian 100 years hence will say not that Germany alone was responsible for it, even if she strikes first, but that those who mismanaged the world between 1918 and 1937 had a large share of responsibility in it." That was the British ambassador to America before war even broke out. Now, that's 1938. We have now 1996. That means that almost 100 years are up, and all kinds of historians are delving into the archives, and they're coming exactly to these conclusions. Well, right now they are still being hunted and hounded, like the British historian David Irving, the German historian Diewald, people like myself. You know, we have our houses torched and are being jailed, and have our postal accounts, checking accounts and so on being seized because we write these uncomfortable truths. But here is the British ambassador, Lord Lothian, to the United States in March 1938, before a shot had been fired, saying that if another war comes and the history of it is ever written, the dispassionate historian 100 years hence will say not that Germany alone was responsible for it, even if she strikes first, but that those who mismanaged the world between 1918 and 1937 had a large share of responsibility in it. Now remember, the operative term here is dispassionate. None of these Jewish writers and promoters of the Jewish viewpoint on history qualify. They're not dispassionate. They're one-sided to the core. And so, don't look for the Finkelsteins and Pimpelhoopers and Cohens and what's his name, Goldhagens, for any truths. There is more to truth than just the Jewish side, let me show you. And you are hearing not the German side, but you are hearing a balanced viewpoint that I'm quoting to you from allied sources so that you can make up your own mind. In his column, April 23rd, 1944, Karl von Wiegand wrote, I quote, "On April 1939, 4 months before Hitler invaded Poland, Ambassador William C. Bullitt, whom I had known for 20 years, called me to the American embassy in Paris. Both of us standing before the fireplace in his office, the windows of which faced the beautiful Place de la Concorde, the American ambassador told me that war had been decided upon. He did not say, nor did I ask by whom. He let me infer it. When I said that in the end Germany would be driven into the arms of Soviet Russia and Bolshevism, the ambassador replied, 'What of it? There will not be enough Germans left when the war is over to be worth Bolshevizing.'" Let me repeat that. I was 5 years old when that conversation took place. It was the day before my birthday. April the 23rd, 1945, famous American writer Karl von Wiegand wrote, On April 1939, 4 months before Hitler invaded Poland, 4 months before Hitler invaded Poland, the American ambassador already knew that war had been decided. Let me quote you his callous statement. In his column, April 23, 1945, Carl von Wiegand wrote, quote, on April 1939, 4 months before Hitler invaded Poland, Ambassador William C. Bullitt, whom I had known for 20 years, called me to the American embassy in Paris, both of us standing before the fireplace in his office, the windows of which faced the beautiful Place de la Concorde. The American ambassador told me that war had been decided upon. He did not say, nor did I ask, by whom. He let me infer it. When I said that in the end Germany would be driven into the arms of Soviet Russia and Bolshevism, the ambassador replied, what of it? There will not be enough Germans left when the war is over to be worth Bolshevizing. End of quote. That's what I say to you about American power politics coupled with British power politics coupled with Jewish interest. Let me refresh your memory. James Forrestal, quoting Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of England. And he says, in 27th December 1945, I played golf with Joe Kennedy today, the father of John F. Kennedy. And he said that Chamberlain's position in 1938 was that England had not much to fight with and she would not risk going to war with Hitler. In Kennedy's view, that Hitler would have fought Russia without any later conflict with England if it had not been for Bullets, that same Bullets, William C. Bullitt, then ambassador to France, urging on Roosevelt in the summer of 1939 that the Germans must be faced down about Poland. Neither the French nor the British would have made Poland a cause of war if it had not been for the constant needling from Washington. Bullitt, he said, kept telling Roosevelt that the Germans would not fight. Kennedy said that they would overrun Europe. Chamberlain, the Premier of England, Prime Minister of England, he says, stated that America and the world's Jews had forced England into the war. Now, here is Carl von Wiegand saying that very same Bullitt told him on April 1939, 4 months before the war started, that war had been decided upon. And then he said that he wouldn't say who, by whom, but he said, when it is said that in the end Germany would be driven into the arms of Soviet Russia and Bolshevism, the ambassador replied, what of it? There will not be enough Germans left when the war is over to be worth Bolshevizing. Not a shot had been fired in anger in Europe. The American ambassador in Paris, talking to a famous American journalist, already says, knowing the slaughter that would take place in Europe, that there won't be enough Germans there to Bolshevize. Those Germans were people of flesh and blood. My father, my mother, my sisters, my uncles. 100 million German people, along with 250 million Russians, Poles, Romanians, absolutely meant nothing. The suffering that was going to come meant nothing. And these people died in their beds peacefully. Should they not have been strung up as warmongers and war criminals? I ask you in all honesty, 4 months before the war starts, 4 months before the first shot is fired, this American ambassador says, so what? There will not be enough Germans left when the war is over to be worth Bolshevizing. A month earlier, according to the Associated Press, Joseph Stalin, in one of his most outspoken statements, told the world that Soviet Russia would not be dragged into a conflict with Germany as a cat's paw to pull British and French chestnuts out of the fire. Underlying the policy of non-intervention against fascism, he said, was a desire to embroil Italy, Japan, and Germany as deeply as possible in a war against the Soviet Union, and then, when they all had become weakened by conflict, come on the stage with fresh forces and dictate the peace. This is exactly what Stalin fell into after. So how much was Stalin his own man? Who knows? Was Ehrenburg his Jewish propaganda? Was Wyszynski? Were all these other Jewish high-ranking Bolsheviks behind him? More Kaganovich, his Minister of Industries, War Production, the man in charge of the Soviet State Bank. Were they more powerful? Was Stalin also only a puppet? Because certainly when you hear him say that Joseph Stalin, in one of his most outspoken statements, told the world that Soviet Russia would not be dragged into conflict with Germany as a cat's paw to pull British and French chestnuts out of the fire. Underlying the policy of non-intervention against fascism, he said, was a desire to embroil Italy, Japan, and Germany as deeply as possible in a war against the Soviet Union, and then, when they all had become weakened by conflict, come on the stage with fresh forces and dictate the peace. He outsmarted his allies in the end, because President Roosevelt, befuddled and weakened by illness and by God knows what, allowed Stalin and his communists that had infiltrated the American government to dictate the peace policy which we have inherited in history, known as the Yalta and Potsdam agreements, with all the disasters that they brought for Europe and the world. We have outlined those in previous shows. No need to go back into here again. A month after the conflict started, Pravda said, peace and friendship between the USSR and Germany are also in the interests of all nations of Europe. Conditions of anxiety, enmity, and mutual distrust in Eastern Europe are advantageous only for warmongers who are used to make others pull chestnuts out of the fire for them. Such conditions were maintained in the course of many years by a policy of incitement of one country against the other. Now, that's still Pravda talking, the mouthpiece of Joseph Stalin. But what happened? Before Hitler struck, a huge armada of 220 Soviet divisions were pulled together in absolute top-notch war preparation to attack Germany. And more historians in Europe are now admitting that what Hitler did was strike, a preemptive strike at the heart of Stalin's plan, which by that time either had changed or all along he was talking out of both corners of his mouth. Professor Harry Elmer Barnes, in reply to the charge of bellicosity of the German people, says the following: England has been a way out in front in point of relative bellicosity amongst the nations, while Germany and the Netherlands stand at the very bottom of the list next to Denmark. This conclusion is forced by such findings as those in Professor Quincy Wright's A Study of War, wherein it is shown that in the period from 1480 to 1940, there were 278 wars involving European countries, whose percentage participation was as follows: England, 28% of all the wars fought in Europe; France, 26%, Spain, 23%, Russia, 22%, Austria, 19%, Turkey, 15%, Poland, 11%, Sweden, 9%, Italy, 9%, Netherlands, 8%, Germany, including Prussia, 8%, and Denmark, 7%. You can find that in Volume 1, page 221 of Quincy Wright's A Study of War from 1480 to 1940. So the Germans and Denmark share the last place, and that includes Prussia. So what is this bull that these people like this man in here, the Jewish writer Theodor Nathan Kaufmann, talks about Germany's war lust and lust for world conquest and death to Germany and so on. England, France, Spain, Russia, Austria, Turkey, Poland, Sweden, Italy, Netherlands, all fought more wars in the 500 years preceding the Second World War than Germany. So, if you have a record like that over 500 years, what is one war? Is it because it only counts that it is the last war? Likewise, Pitry-Rim Sorokin, in Volume 3, Part 2 of his Social and Cultural Dynamics, shows that from the 12th century to 1925, the percentage of years in which leading European powers have been at war is as follows. He says that on page 352. Spain, 67 years at war since the year 1200, the 12th century. Spain, 7 years at war. Poland, Poland forever the victim. 58 years at war. England, 56 years. France, 50 years. Russia, 46 years. Holland, 44 years. Italy, 36 years. Germany, 28 years. 28 years. Less than half of what Spain was at war. And just about half of what England was at war. So what is this idea of pinning on the Germans, this war lust? It only exists in the figment of the feverish brains of hate mongers and anti-German bigots. That's where it rests. In history books, the Germans don't look too bad at all. Sorokin concludes, therefore, that Germany has had the smallest, in Spain the largest percent of years at war. Of leading modern European states, England, France, and Russia thus show nearly twice the bellicosity displayed by the war-loving Germans. Professor Barnes goes on to say, President Truman has well said that constructive public acts must be based on truth. It is too bad somebody could not have whispered the little truth into his ear before he left for Potsdam. There is little prospect of a structure erected wholly on lies in 1945 will endure any better than the one that was wholly based on lies in 1919. And that is exactly what happened. Adolf Hitler came and ripped that Treaty of Versailles apart as if it was a bunch of toilet paper. And I guarantee you, one day, a German, if not by war, then at least through thought and spirit and truth, will rip Potsdam and Yalta to shreds because they were as unfair and moored in hatred and planned, I have to say it, by Jews like Henry Morgenthau and by people like Nathan Theodore Kaufman. Why should other nations, why should American Gentiles and Christians take the responsibility for the brains, the feverish, sick brains of people like Theodor Kaufmann, who wanted to wipe out the entire German nation, and Henry Morgenthau? It would be intellectually dishonest not to pin the blame where the blame belongs to be pinned. And the probability is that the disillusionment after Potsdam will set in much more rapidly than it did after Versailles. In the period after 1919, we had to wait some years to obtain formally secret documents to upset the lies of the period of war and peacemaking. This time, the upsetting facts are already available and so clear that any honest and informed man can read them whole while running. The only thing that we have to wait for is courage, courage enough to state what is today well known and above serious doubt. In short, to know that an honest historian will not be listed immediately as a defendant in a mass sedition trial. You see, terror against the historians in America, England, and the Western countries, like in the Soviet Union, and still in Germany today, where people like myself are already rotting in jail because we say and tell these uncomfortable truths. And so here is what Elmer Barnes, Professor Harry Elmer Barnes, great American historian, researcher, and the father of modern historical revisionism, said that if the historians could do his job without being threatened by court cases, the truth was already known in 1945, 46, and 47. Nuremberg was concocted in order to prevent a truthful unraveling of history. Believe me, incitement to war is a terrible thing. Oliver Littleton, British Minister of Production, told the Chamber of Commerce of America in London, June 20th, 1944, as reported by the United Press, Japan was provoked into attacking the United States at Pearl Harbor. It is a travesty on history ever to say that America was forced into the war. Imagine that. He was British Minister of Production, and he told already the Chamber of Commerce of America in London, June 20th, 1944, in the middle of the war, that Japan was provoked into attacking the United States at Pearl Harbor. It is a travesty on history ever to say that America was forced into the war. It is now established that to try to avoid war with the United States, Germany ordered its submarines not to retaliate in any way when attacked by U.S. forces under orders from Washington. In clear violation of international law, our vessels in the Atlantic were ordered 2 months before Pearl Harbor to shell all Axis craft encountered. At the time, Admiral Stark had sent a message to Admiral Kimmel that we are at war in the Atlantic. 2 months after Pearl Harbor, Prime Minister Winston Churchill told the House of Commons, "When I survey and compute the powers of the United States and its vast resources and feel that they are now in with us, with the British Commonwealth of Nations, altogether, however long it lasts, till death or victory, I cannot believe that there is any other fact in the whole world which can compare with that. That is what I had dreamed of, aimed at, and worked for, and now it has come to pass." Balance of power. People be damned, lives be ruined, made no difference to these plutocrats in Washington, the Bolsheviks in Russia, and these oligarchy in England. They wanted to retain power at all costs. Hitler was a threat, not to the Jews, to them. And that's why Germany nearly had to die.